Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 8 of season 1 of Star Trek Discovery called, let me call this up again, Si Vis Pacem para Bellum, which according to the magic of the internet means to secure peace is to prepare for war in Latin, which is a pretty fitting episode title for this situation here. All right, so let's kind of get right into things. So I really did enjoy this episode quite a bit, especially since it really does a nice job of fleshing out Saru. Um, the insight we can that bit where he talks about how like his people are born afraid. How until he comes to this planet Pavo, he's never had a moment in his entire life where he wasn't afraid. And if you really stop and think about that, it really makes me wonder, like, what all of this means for like the culture and the religion of his people. You know, a situation where you are always afraid. Now, granted, I'm sure there's levels of this, but still. And they do mention that his people come from a planet where they had to spend a lot of time when their species was evolving dealing with apex predators. So it all makes sense. In a way, they'd be kind of like squirrels. You know how skittish squirrels are. And the whole thing about sensing death. Again, it makes sense, but you're something like, well, how does a society like this work? How does a culture like this work? What type would they have in terms of spirituality? How would they cope with this constant feeling of fear? Because, surprise, surprise, you know, being in a constant state of anxiety for humans is extremely damaging to our health. Does this mean that these people have like a naturally shorter lifespan than most other humanoid species, or is this something they've learned to cope with? I mean, it's really, really interesting. And man, oh man, is this is just so great. Such a great performance by Doug Jones. This episode. I mean, he's a guy I've been a fan of ever since the first Hellboy movie, and just you know him really finally having a chance to really strut his stuff and start getting some of the recognition that he's probably been overdue is really, really nice. I mean, this was a very strong episode. The whole situation with Saru on this planet Pavo, where he's finally found a place where he doesn't feel that fear. It's taken away from him. He's genuinely at peace, and not even really, I guess, at peace, just simply not afraid all the time for the first time in his life. I mean, no wonder that feeling is intoxicating, and it causes him to sort of do anything to hold on to this feeling. It reminds me of videos I've seen of things like people who are deaf getting cochlear implants and hearing things like music or the sound of rain or the voice of their mother for the first time in their entire life, and just the way they light up when this new sense, something that they've been denied all their life, is given to them for the first time. And that feeling of not being afraid has been denied to Saru his whole life, his entire species, for basically as long as they've been sapient, from what he says. I mean, think about that for a moment. He really might be the first member of his species to be free from fear in any time since they've been, you know, definable as the species that they are. In a way, it's kind of a monumental, possibly a monumental moment for his people. But even if that's not quite the case, it's a monumental moment for Saru. So it's really hard to blame him for what he does. I mean, what he does is wrong, trying to, you know, basically trap everybody there and attacking his crewmates. But he's clearly not thinking straight. I mean, his judgment, his ability to understand right and wrong, the euphoria he has found has just completely, you know, sent that into the trash can. And I'm glad that nobody really seems to hold this against him. They get where Saru is coming from. And I do respect that, where there are extraordinary situations like this, and people, you know, deal with it through empathy. That's nice, and it's very much at the core of what's going on what Star Trek is about, is that we should look towards understanding and empathy as our first tools in dealing with people when there's conflict. Also, some nice stuff with Ash and Burnham this episode. It just really hit me. Ash, Burnham. Ash, Burn. Okay, I probably should have seen that earlier. But I do like where they talk about basically the fact that once this war is over, Ash can just sort of go on back to the Pacific Northwest and, hang around on a boat if he wants. Burnham has to go back to jail for life. And frankly, anything that she does while on the Discovery is probably going to matter virtually nil in terms of any sort of clemency. I mean, helping to put out a fire is great, but it's not so great if you started that fire deliberately in the first place and everybody knows it. They'll be like, well, okay, yeah, you helped, but you're the one that caused this mess in the first place. So, yeah. And I'm glad that Burnham realizes that. She knows that nothing she does is really going to make any sort of tangible difference. There is no chance she gets to lead a normal, happy life. There is no happy ending with this guy who's obviously taking an interest in her, and mutual feelings or not, there's no real future for this relationship. Which, sad, but them's the breaks, right? And let me see here. There's something I wanted to... right. I also like how they're giving Tilly and Stamets some stuff to do. Like, what's going on with Stamets is really, really interesting. I just wish I could stop thinking that he's Alan Tukiad every time I look at that guy. I mean, obviously, Alan Tukiad's an older fellow and he looks a little different, but there is a really strong resemblance between these two in my mind. I just can't quite get past it. But him sort of talking about how what's happening with the spore drive is messing with him, and possibly even his perception of time is pretty interesting, especially when it causes him to refer to Tilly as Captain Tilly, potentially hinting at something that might happen to her in the future. And while that does sound pretty crazy, good Starfleet captains have certainly come out of more unlikely people than Tilly. But anyway, think about Picard. When that episode we saw where he was got the chance to sort of make changes in his life, Picard was, before he got stabbed through the heart by a Nausicaan, a pretty unremarkable guy. And if he hadn't found that spark of greatness within himself, he'd have ended up a pretty unremarkable guy. And Tilly, she's starting to make some progress. We've seen to her that there's more to her than initially meets the eye. So the idea that a captain's chair could one day be her destiny, well, again, great Starfleet captains have certainly come from more unlikely corners than her. So why not? Let's see what happens with Tilly. Now, what's going on over on the Klingon side of things? This was also really interesting. Like L'Rell trying to defect to the Federation with Cornwell, and then it kind of going all to hell simply because they decided to stop and chat at the worst possible time in the worst possible place. I did like how L'Rell was like, sorry, but at least this is a swifter death than you would have gotten otherwise. That was nicely done. And then I love how at the end of it, Kor's like, you're not fooling me, for pity's sake, come on. And I was a little disappointed that plan didn't work because, with Cornwell's death, a lot of the stuff that was going on with Lorca, what he was trying to cover up, well, the only person who knows about that is now dead. So L'Rell actually did her enemy quite a big favor. And the idea that she wants to defect to the Federation, that's potentially extremely interesting. Simply because, well, L'Rell sexually abused Ash. If the Federation takes her in and gives her clemency, Ash would absolutely flip the hell out. I mean, this is someone who has sexually abused a Starfleet officer, and yet the Federation would be taking her in and doubtlessly throwing in some good old-fashioned clemency in exchange for her help in stopping this war. And again, that's going to go over extraordinarily poorly with Ash, aka her one of her victims. Um, so yeah, that's an extremely intriguing idea. I mean, certainly it would suck for Ash, but in terms of storytelling potential, it's really interesting. And there being some sort of a defector from the Klingons. Well, geez, who would ever expect a Klingon to defect? I mean, that's also extremely interesting. So I have a feeling that one way or another, this show might end up kind of going in that direction at some point in the future, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you this time around. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.